All right, welcome everybody. Hello, YouTubers out there. So we are very pleased to have Dr. Jay Burmeister with us today. So he comes over periodically to talk to our medical physics students about all the great things going on Wayne State Medical Physics and what the career is all about and why you all should think about going to Wayne State and continuing your career there. So we're very much indebted to him for coming over. So thank you very much. And I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Resi, and I appreciate the invitation to come over and speak with you guys, and I know there are great things going on here as well. So we've been very happy to have a large number of students from University of Windsor come through our program and be extremely successful, many of which have gone on to do residency training within our institution and affiliated institutions, and we even end up hiring some as staff physicists in our group. So,
and it's really expensive.
What is expensive?
Study there, 35,000.
The tuition.
Yeah.
Well, at one time there was a reciprocation agreement between University of Windsor. Sorry, not Windsor. It was Western Ontario got resident tuition at Wayne State. I don't know if that is still the case. Does anybody know? I guess I should have checked on
my
that.
students.
Okay.
A couple of my students joined that program, grad program. And they was crying.
Yeah.
It's life.
You didn't pay for them?
It's the United States.
Yes. So cost-wise, we're very competitive with most programs. There are a number of programs that are much more expensive than us. But for non-resident tuition, it does begin to add up, particularly for the PhD. But presumably you'll get on graduate research assistantship very quickly if you're going the PhD route, so you wouldn't have to bear that entire tuition burden. So. But we can get to that when you guys have questions. If I sell you, then we can talk about how much it costs to sell you. So.
Discount.
People do it. Everybody gets through it.
Yes.
So it's completely doable, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Actually,
people do it.
They're screaming, but go.
Yeah. Remind me at the end. Actually, let's talk about return on investment afterward, right? We can talk about what residents in medical physics make, and then what new staff and faculty medical physicists make, both in Canada and the U.S. And I think you'll find that the return on it is very, very good.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the profession, and then I'm going to talk specifically about what we do at Wayne State and what is unique about our program, and give you some ideas about the program. And this is going to be very interactive. So if you have any questions, stop me at any time. Please don't hesitate. I don't have an hour's worth of stuff to talk about, so I'm hoping that you'll fill it with some questions. Otherwise, I kind of have to force questions from you at the end. So what I really want to talk about is what it's like to have a career in medical physics. And for those of you who have thought about this already, you know some of these aspects, but I'm going to talk about each one in succession. First, how do you educate yourself to be a medical physicist? What is the training that's involved? We'll talk about board certification, some description of what many medical physicists do, and then what the job prospects look like in the profession today. I had originally had this picture in there just because it's cool. Are we still going?
Oh yeah.
Okay. But I thought this would be a nice picture to leave in there just to give you an idea of the transition that takes place from being a physicist to being a medical physicist. And so you guys are lucky in the sense that you get exposed to this stuff in undergrad, and very few programs have something like this to give you that opportunity. And really there are only a handful of programs that I know of, universities that I know of, that have a program like this that gives you some exposure to medical aspects of physics before you get to graduate school. I didn't have that opportunity, and so I came from pure physics. And I remember first time I ever used this slide. This is actually the first LINAC treatment of a patient in the Western Hemisphere. They beat us in England by 6 months or so. But I remember presenting this figure and explaining to people in the hospital about the transition from my transition from nuclear physics to medical physics. And I said, when I first came into medical physics, if you'd have shown me this picture, I would have said, oh, yeah, that's the first linear accelerator at Stanford. And this is how the device works, and it replaced what was traditionally done at the time, which is Cobalt-60, which, by the way, was largely developed here in Canada. And today, if I look at that picture, I see something totally different, and this is the transition that I'm speaking about when I get into a profession in medical physics. And today, if I were to describe this picture, I wouldn't start at this side of the picture. I'd start at the more important side of the picture, in that this is Gordon Isaacs, and he was a little boy with bilateral retinoblastoma, and his mother was given the terrifying option of having cobalt-60 at the time, which probably would have had some pretty significant and terrifying side effects, or having both eyes removed, or a variety of other possible options that were not very appealing to her at the time. But a physician and physicist at Stanford happened to be collaborating at the time, looking at bringing this device into the clinic, and they decided that he would be a perfect candidate to be the first patient to be treated on this, and he retained vision and lived an otherwise healthy life. And since then, probably tens of millions of other people have been treated using LINAC-based radiotherapy, and this is something that I do on a daily basis, and I'll describe to you how we do it, and who's involved, and what they do. So I figured that'd be a nice way to start the discussion of a career in medical physics. So how do you get there? So your undergraduate preparation, as I said, is pretty unique. I think you have a great leg up on a lot of other applicants to medical physics graduate programs, in the sense that you already have a familiarity with a lot of these concepts. And the other aspect too that I think is important is you get an opportunity to see some of these things firsthand. I know you have co-op programs and things of that nature, or at least you have opportunities to get acquainted with what some physicists do in medicine. And that is more than what a lot of undergraduate students get. They hear about the profession oftentimes very late in the consideration of graduate programs in physics, and don't really know much about it. And it's actually surprising to us each year how many students come and sit in their first lecture like this while I'm giving the orientation, and they don't really have any idea of what they'll do on a day-to-day basis as a medical physicist, which I find really surprising. But you know, I didn't hear about medical physics. I didn't even know that the profession existed until a couple of years into graduate school in physics. And so for me, the idea of being able to have this kind of tangible impact on patients was really, really appealing. And the opportunity to practice in the hospital was something that seemed really exciting. And I went to visit the program, I guess, 25 years ago, roughly, and met with a guy named Colin Orton, who was the program director at the time. And he sold me on medical physics in probably an hour. And I hung out there for the day, watched some of the things that they do, and got acquainted with some of the things that medical physicists do in a profession, and then ended up doing my PhD in medical physics. And Colin retired maybe 5 years later, and asked me if I would take over the graduate program. And so, you know, for me, it's been kind of a dream come true, stumbling upon what I think was the perfect profession for me, and then happening to be in the right place at the right time to be able to take on this program. So not only to do the thing that I really love in the hospital, which is taking care of patients, but also to do the thing that I really love in academia, which is to teach and to see people like you come through the program and go out and be successful. And really, one of the most rewarding things for me in the profession is going to national meetings for the American Association of Physicists in Medicine and the American Society of Radiation Oncology, and seeing hundreds of former trainees, both graduate students, residents, medical residents, that I've had the opportunity to interact with. And they come up and say, hey, it's great to see you. Guess what? I did this, this, and this, and now I'm a faculty member at so-and-so. And thank you for, you know, getting me into the profession, or thank you for, you know whatever you did to help facilitate my career. It really, I do feel like I was extremely lucky to be able to have the opportunity to do both of those things. And I would tell you that both of those options are available to you in medical physics. Both the clinical aspect is very much available to you, as well as the academic aspect. And so if those two things sound appealing to you, then give some serious thought to this as a possible career. So moving on from undergraduate preparation into graduate training, we're going to talk about what kind of graduate training you need. Residency training is something that you'll need if you're going to get board certification. So board certification is something that we'll talk about as well, and medical physicists are board certified by the American Board of Radiology. That's the same, this is in the US. A little bit different in Canada, but somewhat similar. The ABR also certifies diagnostic radiologists as well as radiation oncologists. And so in the US, we're lucky to be the only non-physicians who are certified by a member of the American Board of Medical Specialties. So we're unique in that we're the only scientists involved in this entire thing in medicine. So I think we're lucky as a profession to have built that and established that, and I look at that as a great thing for the longevity and for the importance of this profession moving forward.
Could we interrupt you? Or
Sure, yeah, please do.
What's the benefit of that? I will not be, if I will be certified as a physicist, I will be not equal to a physician. So why I need that? So to put on the wall?
Sure.
Nice
Mine sits on a shelf. I never even bothered to put it on a wall, but that doesn't mean that it's not extremely important to me. It was one of the biggest hurdles in my professional
No, I
career.
understand. Exactly.
So in some sense it does give you equality with the physicians in terms of your role in the hospital, and it's viewed very differently. You don't make the same amount of money as they do, so if we're talking equality in pay, it's not that.
They will sue you as a physician.
They will what?
Sue you.
Well, actually, the good news for us is that we rarely get sued. It's usually the physicists who get sued, or the physician who gets sued because they have deeper pockets than we do. But so in terms of equality of pay, that doesn't exist with physicians. But bringing that up, our salary is very, very good. When I look at what medical physicists make, and I look at what I was anticipating that I would make getting a PhD in pure physics, which is where I started, job prospects and pay are significantly higher in medical physics than they are in other disciplines of physics. So certainly there's nothing to complain about in terms of salaries as a medical physicist. And everybody in the hospital, I shouldn't say everybody, many people in the hospital like to do this. It's the keeping up with the Joneses. Hey, how come they make more money than I do when I have the same training and the same board certification? I guess I would encourage you not to think about it that way if you ever go into this profession, because we could have gone to med school. We could have trained to be a physician. That's not what I chose. I chose physics for some specific reasons would probably resonate with all of you guys. And I certainly would never second guess that. We do actually have students occasionally, and I can think of 3 off the top of my head that came through our graduate program and ended up going to medical school and becoming physicians. They're practicing right now. As I said, if that was the path that we had chosen, then we would have chosen that path and accepted all of the salaries, benefits, and drawbacks that go with that profession. So at the end of the day, we have very important clinical responsibilities with respect to the patients that we care for, like the one I showed you a minute ago, but they're very different than those that the physician accepts. And I guess the way I look at it is for the responsibility that the physician accepts with respect to how we treat that patient, I feel like they deserve whatever they can negotiate with the hospital or with their physician group. And I'm certainly very happy with the role that I get to play in the process, and again, like I said, very happy with the fact that the thing that I love to do actually pays a really good salary, right? So a lot of us who have kids who are looking at college right now, like I do, think, well, what if my child chooses something that doesn't really pay any money? And that's okay, right? I mean, I would say follow your dreams to what is really going to make you happy, because that's ultimately going to be the thing that's going to be most rewarding to you, because nobody ever puts on their tombstone, man, I wish I'd have chosen a profession that made more money. But back to the board certification, what it provides for you, I really do think that it provides a level of equality with the physicians in the clinical realm. And so it's just one piece of the foundation of what we do in the hospital, but it's an important piece, and it's one that's recognized by hospital administration and other folks when they see, well, here's a PhD that does this, and I don't really know what that means, but they're board certified by the same group as Dr. So-and-so, and I know what he or she does. So that gives you some equal footing when you get into hospital committees and the infrastructure of hospital academia and some other places. And actually the most tangible benefit right off the bat is board certification gives you essentially the street credibility and the licensure to do whatever you want to do in the clinic. And if you want to be on a license for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, oh, you're board certified? Sure. Well, we just need a form to be filled out and all of the paperwork that goes with it, and you're done. There's no more questions asked. If you're board certified, that is your meal ticket to anything that you want to do, at least in the U.S. in terms of medical physics. There's no question about your capabilities or your training or your aptitude if you're board certified.
Does
If
it
you're not board
require-
certified,
Does it require any more ongoing professional development once you're certified?
it does, yes.
So there's that too, right? It kind of, you have to
There is.
maintain it.
Right.
It ensures that this person's up to speed and up to date all the time.
Yeah.
So that's
There is maintenance of certification,
There you
which is an
go.
important aspect
Okay.
of it too, which demonstrates that you're maintaining your competency
Yep.
as a practitioner. And that's not necessarily a guaranteed thing, and it's something that we don't normally think about, to be honest with you, at an academic center. And maintenance of certification can be scoffed at by some people at academic centers, because you think, really, do I really need to tell the ABR that I'm maintaining my certification and maintaining my competency? Because, for example, I do a lot of volunteer work for the ABR, and so I participate in preparing a lot of the examinations. And so you could look at it in one sense of, do I really need to tell the ABR that I'm staying current when I'm helping you write the exams? But on the other side, I think, well, the majority of the people that are out there board certified are not actually practicing in academic institutions. So it'd be very easy if I were practicing at a small community hospital, and there are a lot more of these that exist in the US than you're used to here. Here, if you get radiotherapy, there are a much smaller number of centers, and they're all very big, which I think is a better model, by the way, but that's a different talk. We have lots and lots of small places that might only have one physicist in the entire hospital. And it's quite possible that if that person is not actively engaged in research and continuous quality improvement, that they don't stay competent. If they're not going to national meetings and they're not doing new things, it is entirely possible. So, but yeah, thank you. That was a good question. And hopefully that was some of the stuff that I was going to talk about with respect to board certification moving forward anyways. All right. So into graduate education. The American Association of Physicists in Medicine is something that you should all be familiar with if you're thinking about this. There's also a Canadian organization, CCMP, is that right? That serves a similar function in Canada. And this is our professional organization. Most of the things that are done in terms of professional service within medical physics are done under the umbrella of the AAPM. And so the AAPM has put together this report number 197. Tells you what a nauseatingly large number of reports there are out there for you to actually become familiar with when you go to take your board exam. But this is the one that specifies graduate education curriculum. And so these are some of the things that you'll find in that report 197. And by the way, that report, I hope, will be gone by the time you enter medical physics if you do, because I'm currently chairing the next version of this report, and we better have it done by the end of next year, or people are not going to be happy because it's been taking us too long to rewrite this curriculum. But these are some of the primary fundamental building blocks of a graduate education in medical physics. And we could talk about any of these if you want in particular, but I think probably they are relatively straightforward in what the connotation is with each one of these individual ones. But some of the newer things that are beginning to make their way into medical physics, other than the traditional imaging science and radiation therapy, dosimetry, radiation interactions and things like that, are ethics, professionalism, leadership, and things of that nature, which we're really trying to build into our program. And a part of the reason for that is, as a medical physicist, you will end up in a leadership position, and whether you like that or not, you are in a role which leads the technical aspects of the Department of either diagnostic imaging or radiation oncology. And so you'll be a part of setting the culture there in terms of safety, in terms of continuous quality improvement, and in terms of all the technical things that are done in that department. And so while you may or may not have a title or an organizational structure which demonstrates that, meaning there may or may not be multiple groups on the technical side of the department that actually directly report to you. Leadership is about influence, not necessarily about title, and you'll find that you'll be in a position where you will really be influential in terms of setting the culture in each one of those areas that I just mentioned. And so people will look to you as the person who really understands these things at their most fundamental level. So if they have an issue with something that they're doing, so you have a radiation therapist who's treating a patient on a $3 million linear accelerator, and something pops up that they don't quite understand, they're not going to go to the physician and ask the physician, hey, what's going on here? They're going to you as the medical physicist, and they're going to ask, hey, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do here? And should I get this patient down, or can I continue to treat? So it's a unique situation. I'm giving you the example specifically for radiation oncology because that's the discipline in which I work. But I think it's unique in that sense, in that you really do oversee the technical side. And I've heard some people describe radiation oncology specifically as a sort of two-pyramid structure where you have the clinical side with the physicians and everyone who works in support of the physicians on the clinical side, and the medical physicist and everyone who works in support of the physicists on the technical side. I actually hate that description because it seems like it's two separate silos in which people work, whereas it's really not at all. We work so collaboratively that all of this is knit together like this, and I think in a healthy department it should be, that every single person in the department facilitates the effective treatment and safety of every patient and staff member in the department in their own way based on their own training. And so I guess I would describe it more as, I guess if you're familiar with the old Roman army phalanx fighting technique, where if you ever saw the movie 300, where they probably didn't think I was going to talk about the movie 300. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here, but where they have this shield and every person protects the person to their left with the shield. And I think of our department as that way, right? There are people in our department who understand some of the clinical aspects much better than I do. I understand enough about their job to be able to converse with them effectively in what they do. And similarly, they understand enough about my job to converse effectively about what I do. And so if we just take two of those groups, the physicians and the physicists, let's set aside all of the others, the dosimetrists, the nurses, the therapists, and everyone else. We provide, so for our medical residents who are going into radiation oncology, they take physics courses from us for 3 years during their residency. So, and a third of their ABR board exam is actually medical physics. So they know a ton about what we do because it makes them a better practitioner. Similarly, we know a ton about what they do because it makes us better practitioners. Now, one of the things that I dislike about our training infrastructure is that we don't have formal education courses in clinical radiation oncology or diagnostic imaging. We're working to change that somewhat, but there's only so much you can do in the time that you have. And unless we want to make our residencies 4 years instead of 2 years, we're probably not going to be able to incorporate that. But anyway, that's an aside as we move forward toward the future in terms of how we practice as medical physicists. So what's new for you as a student coming into medical physics? And I say here a new language, and this is, some of these slides have content that I've incorporated from talks that I've given at other institutions, primarily in physics institutions where they don't know anything about medical physics. You're lucky because you have some of this language already. And so one of the first hurdles you have to overcome is you have to understand what people are talking about when they talk about both the clinical care and the physics aspects of radiation applications in medicine. And there really is a new language, and a big part of your first term in graduate school in medical physics is learning that new language. You have a lot of new responsibilities in here. One of the most important things that I learned coming into medical physics, because what you do in pure physics is always very intellectually stimulating. And that's why most of us got into physics. And some of the things that you do in medical physics are not as intellectually stimulating, but they have very high stakes. And one of my heroes in medical physics was a guy who taught in Canada here for I don't know how many decades, but one of the things he used to say, he had an old Slovenian proverb, because that's where his family originally emigrated from, that the healthy person has 1,000 wishes, the sick person has only one. And that really hit home to me when I first heard him say that you think about a lot of the things in your daily life and how you like to think about interesting projects and research and a variety of other things that we find intellectually stimulating. But when you walk into our department and and you go down the treatment hallway, you see the faces of a whole bunch of people who are fighting for their life. And that changes your perspective on what you do in a variety of different ways. So I think the opportunity to incorporate that into your daily work is actually really appealing. And a lot of my friends who stayed in period physics said, isn't that going to be depressing working with dying patients every day? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there. And I can tell you now, after 20-some years of this, it doesn't. And the reason being, really, these patients are going through this whether you know them or not, whether you see them or not. And the fact that you see them and you know that they're going through this gives more meaning to your work, and actually, I think, makes me project more meaning into every part of my life. You know, if I open up a chart and I see a child that's the same age as my child, maybe go home and greet my children a little bit differently when I get there. So some of these things are things that I think can affect the rest of your life in a positive way too. But there are other responsibilities that you're probably not used to, like dealing with regulatory agencies in terms of radiation safety, which is terribly frustrating for a physicist to go through mountains and mountains of red tape over something that you know as a physicist is probably not that big a deal. Much like, you know, how we bury our radioactive waste in the U.S., right? So things like the EPA saying that the radiation levels at the surface of a radiation disposal site have to be less than what it is actually in some of our Capitol buildings from the granite that they used in the construction of the building. Silly things like that drive you nuts as a physicist because people don't understand things, and you want to just shake them and say, look, you don't understand. But you don't. You write a very nice letter and you say, I'm very happy to be able to be dealing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on this, and here's all the data that you asked for, and I really appreciate your timely response. Administrative things, a lot of similar aspects that you'll deal with in administration. And when you deal with hospital administration, you deal with people that are, in many ways, and this is a generalization, but in many ways different than us physicists. We think in very particular ways. And many people in the world in other professions don't think in those specific ways. So being able to deal with administration, staff members in other disciplines in your department, and even patients is a really important thing. And one of the things that I've implemented in our graduate program right now is really a lot more emphasis on patient interaction and EQ. You guys have high IQs, but EQ is a really important thing in terms of your ability to work with other people, to communicate with other people, both patients and staff alike. And so that's one of the things that I think traditionally medical physicists haven't necessarily paid much attention to. And so their work sometimes can get marginalized, and they don't really want to sit in meetings, and they don't really want to have to communicate with all of these people. And they really just want to often go and work on the machine and do creative research and do stuff that they feel like is what they were built to do, to try to change people's lives in that way. But as they say about meetings, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And so it is something that I think our students need to learn about in the situation that they ultimately have the opportunity to participate in those things and make life better for patients, because they have the perspective of a scientist on that committee that they might not have had otherwise. And then lastly, financial business issues. Before you get into medicine, you're going to think, I don't know, maybe the thought process is different in this country or in this generation, but I thought, at least, if I ever got really, really sick, that, you know, I'm in a very well-developed country and I'll get the best medical care that money can buy. And that's not true. What you get is in some area where you've minimized cost and effectiveness, hopefully, if your hospital has thought about it in that way. And so for us as care providers and as scientists, we come in the morning every day excited to do new things for patients. And we don't really think, how much does that cost? But that's short-sighted in a specific sense, in that if we go bankrupt, we don't help anybody. So I spend a lot more time than I'd like to thinking about the budgetary aspects of what we do. How many people do we need to do it? How much does it cost to hire those people? What equipment do we need? Can we build some of it ourselves? Can we write a grant for it? These are some of the aspects that we think about as medical physicists when we think about how much it costs to do the things that we do. And we'd love to have an unlimited checkbook, like some departments that I know of in the U.S., but I don't work at those departments, unfortunately. So we count the cost wherever we have to. So that's some of the new territory that you'll be coming across. What about the old territory? So first and foremost, we're physicists, and we don't want to lose that. And that's one of the most important points that I'll make in our graduate program. And I'll encourage our students to think about what is it that makes us valuable to medicine. And when you think about what we do in the hospital, there are a lot of technical jobs that are more engineering-ish type jobs that medical physicists do, and that's fine. I think it's important that we do those. But the most important thing, I think, is that we always think like a physicist. Well, what does it mean to think like a physicist? And how do you foster that? And this goes to our teaching style and a lot of the things that we think about when we think about medical physics education. I don't want to produce an army of button pushers, people that know the technology and they know, okay, if I go over to the machine and I see this error message, I do this. Okay, well, that's handy, but I can teach a chimp to do that. What I can't teach a chimp to do is solve a problem that is formerly unknown to them. And so that's what a lot of our education is based on, is how do you think creatively about solving problems that you've never seen before, thinking outside of the box in that sense. And this is the thing that I think really separates the physicist in medicine. It's not having and retaining knowledge. You'll find that our physician counterparts can do that really, really well. So I sit in conferences with them all day long, and they, something comes up and they say, oh, well, in the Dutch trial in 1974, they showed that 32% of stage 4B cases had this survival. And I think, did you just make that up, or you actually know that number? So they're really good at knowing and retaining information, probably maybe better than we are. I don't know. It doesn't matter, because that's not our job, I think. Our job is to think about how we do things now, how they could be done better, come up with creative solutions, because we're supposed to be and should always be the ones in the department who understand things at their most fundamental level. So when a physician looks at a radiotherapy treatment plan on a computer screen, they see the dose that their patient received, but we don't. We see algorithms that are used to create those calculations, understand the limitations of those algorithms, and understand that that's not a patient. That's a snapshot of a CT scan of a patient that was taken 2 weeks ago in a certain phase of the respiratory cycle, after a certain meal, in a certain immobilized position, and so on. And we understand that this number that they're looking at, that they say, oh, this is the dose that the patient got. We know the size of the error bars that are on that number and other important aspects that we tell them, hey, don't believe this number. Wait, what do you mean don't believe that number? Your computer spit it out. Shouldn't I believe that number? What did you do wrong? So these are the types of things that we really encourage in our program, and it gets down to instruction versus teaching. If I instruct you, you may be able to remember or repeat something that I said, or do something that I did. And that has some value, but I think that value really is more in the realm of residency training. If I teach you, then I arm you with the tools to be able to solve any previously unknown problem. And that's what we're after in medical physics education, really in all medical physics education, because that's the thing that separates us when we say think like a physicist. So when you think about the total number of contact hours that you'll have with our faculty in medical physics graduate education, it's actually not that much. And so if I say it a different way, really my job is not to teach you medical physics, it's to teach you how to learn medical physics, because you're going to spend the rest of your life learning medical physics. You're only going to be in my class for a certain number of hours. And so that's really the philosophy that we use when we think about how we teach and train students. So now that I've sold you on a career in medical physics, let's talk about where you go. So why Wayne State University? First of all, it only took me about 17 minutes to get over here from my office desk. Secondly, there are a lot of things, bless you, there are a lot of things that you'll get off of our website if you're so inclined to go to our website and learn about the program, many of which you can see right here on the slide on the entry page to our website, such as we were the first accredited graduate program in the world, along with the University of Wisconsin, that happened in that same year. We have one of the longest running and most prestigious histories of any medical physics graduate program. We have a huge graduate base out there in practice. At one time, not too far in the distant past, we looked at the number of graduates that were out there practicing, the total number of members of the AAPM, and about 5% or so of them, so about 1 out of every 20 practicing medical physicists in the US was trained at Wayne. And when you think about the people that trained at Wayne that then went on to train other people, and you look at that lineage, you'd find a much, much bigger fraction of people who were out there who had very strong familiarity with the Wayne program. And so that has a tangible benefit in the sense that if somebody's looking for a physicist or a resident, and they look and they see Wayne State, they say, oh, I know Wayne State. I know about Wayne State. Maybe I went to Wayne State, or the guy or gal in the office next door went to Wayne State. I'm going to ask them about it. And people have an opinion about the strength of this program, hopefully a positive one. And you know, before the days of residency training, when students went straight into jobs, this call would happen all the time. Hey, who's your best student coming out, and when are they available? And you know, answer that call back with usually giving them that information, and then I'd get a call a couple weeks later. Hey, I've got so-and-so coming out. Would you hire her? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm giving her an offer when she gets off the plane. Because these are people that are familiar with the Wayne program, maybe even Wayne grads. They understand what the program is about, and they understand the strengths and weaknesses of the program. And it's a small field. The other thing, too, is people know each other, and they know each other well, and they understand when people have the same expectations that they have. So would you hire this person means a lot more when you know that person really well. So, you know, people talk about, what is it, the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon. I don't know if that's a thing anymore, but there's probably 2 degrees of separation in medical physics. There's probably nobody in the profession of medical physics who doesn't at least know somebody that I know. So it's very easy to call somebody up and say, hey, would you hire this person? It's much different than in some other field where you're applying with 10,000 other people for 100 jobs in an accounting firm. So this is a much, much smaller field. There are fewer jobs. And so the con is you don't just decide, hey, I'm gonna move to Windsor, Ontario, and then I'm gonna get a job. It's not like being a teacher or a nurse or something like that. You go where the job is, and there will be a handful of jobs available, but only a handful of people who are qualified to do those jobs. So
you talk about hospitals.
Yeah. If you're going into clinical practice.
What about research centers like Philips Medical Research Center?
Sure. Yeah. So there are a lot of opportunities in industry as well, and we'll get into industry and academia too once we get through the education piece. So these are the core courses in our program. I'm not going to spend much time on them. I don't know why I threw all of this stuff at you. Maybe you just take in your mind a quick snapshot of all these courses and get an idea of what they are, because they're very similar from program to program, because AAPM Report 197 sort of specifies what these courses should be. We have a great set of faculty. You can see here on the left-hand side, this is the textbook, Basic Clinical Radiobiology, authored by Michael Joyner, who is our head of radiobiology, so he's the one who would teach you radiobiology. On the right-hand side is Physics and Technology of Radiation Therapy by Pat McDermott, who was one of our primary educators when I came through the program many years ago, and is still a Wayne State faculty member. And Colin Orton, who was the one I mentioned earlier, who was the program director when I arrived there. And in the middle is an advertisement for our medical physics graduate program, because our university recognizes that top 10-ish programs are relatively rare. And ours almost certainly is thought of by most individuals in medical physics as one of those such programs. So, these are some of our faculty members. Probably doesn't mean anything to you to see their faces, other than, hey, there's a bunch of people there, and one of them doesn't have a photo. But if you knew about medical physics and you were in this profession and you are a part of this 2 degrees of separation, you'd say, oh, well, I know this guy, and I know that guy, and I've heard of this woman, and I've heard of that guy, and so on. And many of these are very, very well-known names in medical physics, and these are the people who would teach your classes and guide your research projects. One of the other things that I would recommend is this paper, Navigating the Medical Physics Education and Training Landscape, and this is something that we just put out a couple of years back. This was, September 2017, this was accepted for publication, and actually around that time became the second most read paper in this journal at that time. In early 2017, I recognized that the field was changing very rapidly, and the data that people like you needed to see to determine whether this was a viable profession and an attractive one to you, wasn't really out there and wasn't easily available. And so at that time, one of our graduate students and I wrote basically student's guide to the medical physics profession. And has anybody seen that, out of curiosity? So if you go to, when you go to our website, if you go, let me just jump back to that. If you go to our website here and go under program information and look at what is medical physics, most of that text will show up right there. Where the document is actually published is on the Society of Directors of Academic Medical Physics Programs, or SDAMP, with 2 P's. So you probably, that's what they do. You probably won't go to the SDAMP site, but if you do, you'll find that document there that was written by Evan Silverstein, who was one of our PhD students at the time, and myself, which was aimed at giving students the information that they needed in order to make educated choices about the medical physics career. And at that same time, I decided that we ought to put this out in full publication too, and evaluate some of the data that exists. So I went and talked to Brian Lockery, who was also one of our PhD students at that time, now a faculty member for us, and said, hey, how'd you like to write a paper? That would be really cool, and you'll be on there with all of these big name people who are sort of leaders of education in medical physics. He said, awesome. I said, it'd make you really marketable, because when you look at where these people are, University of Texas, MD Anderson, University of Washington, University of Michigan, Brenda's retired also MD Anderson, University of Wisconsin, and so on. These are all the big name places, along with Wayne State, that are the heavy hitters in medical physics education. So he put together all of the data that existed at that time about the education and training landscape, and this is just an example of that. This is one of the figures from that paper, the first figure in that paper, which gives you an idea of how much the field has grown over the years, starting at 2004 and going to 2015 at the time of gathering these data. And one of the things that's changed a lot, when I first started directing our graduate program in 2003, there were 6 accredited programs in all of North America. Now there are 53. And so the number of programs has gone through the roof, the number of graduates has gone through the roof. Now we have a requirement in order to get board certified that you have to do a residency, and the number of residency spots is only about 1/3 of the number of graduates from all accredited graduate medical physics programs. So that's a terrifying statistic for you as a prospective student. So you need data like this. And this is another aspect of those data. This is residency placement percentage for MS, PhD, and certificate. I'll talk about the certificate a little bit later. And then total. And if you look at these numbers here from 2009 to 2016, they're going up because we're creating a lot more residency positions. But if you average all these out, it's 28%. So if you have a class, I guess, based on these data, if you have a class full of medical physics graduate students, you're going to say, well, maybe a little over 1/4 of you are actually going to get a residency position. And the rest of you, good luck. Find something in academia and industry, some other career path that doesn't require board certification. And so these data are for all of the accredited programs combined. When you look at our data, this data is available on our website, and this is not an eye chart. I don't expect you to read any of this. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, and that is this. From 2009 to 2018, our residency placement rate is 72%. But if you look at the last 3 years, 94%. So the reason why it's so much higher here is back in these years, residency was not required. And so the vast majority of our students, even though they had the opportunity to go into a residency position, didn't, because they've got a job offer in hand. And you think, boy, residency sounds good because I'd learn all of this stuff at another academic institution. It would be a better thing for me. Sort of like the way a physician views a fellowship. It would be better training and I would be better trained. But here I have this job offer at the place I want to go to, and they're offering me a lot of money. And so a lot of our graduates would take those jobs. So looking at these numbers, you can tell that our program is very different than the average program in medical physics in terms of our ability to place people into residencies. And it's actually one of the things that's driving the number of students that we take each year. We used to take on the order of 12 students per year into the graduate program, but we know we can't place 12 students into residency positions each year. So right now we're typically taking around half of that. So typically about 6 students coming in per year, because we believe we can place at least 6 to 8 students into medical physics residency spots. Some of them are affiliated with us, with our program. We have one actually that's affiliated with us here in Windsor, at Windsor Regional Cancer Center. We have 2 spots in our own campus. We have an affiliation with Henry Ford Hospital, who I think has 5 spots, and then Beaumont Hospital has 3 spots maybe, and they're also affiliated with us. So these are places where a lot of our students go because they know us really well. But we also place people in a variety of other spots. And word gets out if you train good students. So for example, 4 years ago, we had a student match at a residency position at Mayo Clinic, and they liked her so much, the next year they took another Wayne student. I actually got an email asking, hey, are your students applying for our residency position again? And by the way, after she was done with her residency, we hired her within the McLaren network, which actually owns our hospital system. So this is just another thing that I throw out there to you, which goes with what I talked about previously about this interdisciplinary education. This was actually a course called IBPRO, Integrating Biology and Physics and Radiation Oncology, and this was something that we did on a 5-year NIH grant to train a large number of physicists, biologists, and radiation oncologists on interdisciplinary education. And so we brought all these people on campus, about 50 or 60 researchers, faculty level researchers each year, to train them in this interdisciplinary science. And the results were actually pretty remarkable in terms of the number of funded research projects and the number of publications that actually came out of this course. And actually another thing that came out of this course was a debate series which I currently run in one of our journals. Actually, it was the journal that you just saw a minute ago. Typical debates in journals typically have a physician against another physician or something like that. So this is unique in the sense that it has one physicist, one biologist, and one physician versus another team of the same 3 disciplines. So that's another long-standing thing that actually came from this course, among other things. So if Wayne State seems appealing to you, and I guess even if it doesn't, you'd want to make yourself competitive for our program or some other program. And I guess 5 or 6 years ago, I set out to try to correlate admissions statistics to graduate student success in medical physics, and this was published in Journal of Applied Clinical Medical Physics back in 2014. And basically looked at all of our data over a 10-year span, trying to get an idea of whether we were doing our job well. And by that I mean this. We were bringing in over those years probably on the order of 10 to 15 students a year. Most of them were being very successful. A handful weren't. But as I always tell students at the first lecture of the first course in the program and in the orientation, I teach the intro course, which is our weed out course, if you will. But if we've done our job well as an admissions committee, there's nobody to weed out. So my question in writing this paper, gathering the data to write this paper was, are we doing our job well? And so why are we weeding anybody out? Is there a better way that we can more appropriately evidence-based methods of selecting students so we can make sure that we select the best students? So what was it about the students that we brought in that made them successful? And so this is just a set of data that came from that paper showing some of the variables that we looked at. These are undergrad GPAs, GRE scores that probably look unfamiliar to you because this is the old GRE score format for verbal and quantitative, along with undergraduate degree type. And actually in those days, more than half of our students actually had a prior graduate degree because they were like me in that they already had spent several years in graduate school before they had ever even heard that medical physics was a thing, and then they decided they wanted to go into it. So we had a lot of students with PhDs in physics who heard about it and came back and did our master's program. So, that was always kind of an interesting thing where you sit down with somebody who has a PhD in physics and say, okay, now you got to do a master's research project and do a master's thesis. How do you think you'll do with research? So these data were actually published in the paper from 2014. You're probably interested in the data from today. So this is data from the past 3 or 4 years from our students that we've accepted, undergrad GPA GRE scores. How many of them have an undergraduate degree in physics, and how many have a prior graduate degree. Still a lot of students coming with prior graduate degrees, but many more coming with undergraduate physics degrees than previously. The percentiles are also given there along with the GRE scores. It gives you an idea of how these compare with everyone else taking the GRE. So it turns out that GPA is an important indicator, but probably not as important as the degree type you had and where you did that degree. So those are really important things that we look at as an admissions committee. And statistically speaking, the p-value wasn't significant for the quantitative GRE score. And that first baffled us for a few minutes, and then we thought, oh wait, we don't really have any spread in the GRE score. Everybody we take is way up here. And so we don't have any people down here. They don't get admitted to the program, so we don't have any data on low scoring quantitative GRE scores. So that's probably why that wasn't statistically significant. But what was, very much so, was the analytical writing. And in hindsight now, looking at that, and I didn't have as good a feel for this back in 2014, but I do now, communication is such an important part of the role of a clinical medical physicist. And when we look at how these people were successful in a variety of things, like the oral review sessions at the end of our program, like job interviews, like interviews for residency positions, and a variety of other things that make people, how many papers they wrote and grants they got afterward. Those are things that are all very fundamentally related to your communication skills and not just your intelligence. And so it makes sense that if you pick somebody, if you take GRE quantitative right off the top, because people who don't score well in the quantitative probably don't even gravitate toward medical physics because they don't like that. Take those people and then select from them the best communicators, and you're going to find yourself a cohort of people who would make good medical physicists if they're so inclined to do so. In terms of student success, these are some of the student awards that our students have won recently, including there's a new thing at the AAPM called the MedPhys Slam, which is, you've probably heard of these 3-minute thesis presentations where you present to a bunch of people who don't know anything about your discipline. Our student, Eric Morris, took second place in the National MedPhys Slam in its inaugural year. He actually also won second place in the Young Investigator Symposium for all of North America at that meeting as well. Rebecca Kolkazi is also one of our PhD students and actually a resident in our institution as well, who won an AAPM fellowship for graduate study in medical physics. And by the way, I would strongly encourage you to apply for that, but don't hold your breath because there's only one award given each year, and remember I said there are 53 graduate programs. So out of all the applicants for that award from all 53 graduate programs, she was the one who was awarded that coming into our graduate program. So some of these students do a phenomenal job in terms of...
We have class starting in 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll wrap up quickly. Success is not just...
It looks like he's a professional.
Yeah.
Champion.
Yeah. Success is not just judged by awards. The camaraderie that you see here in this photo, I think, is indicative of what you see in our graduate program as well. Some of the degree options are listed here, one of the most important of which is you're going to have to decide whether you want to do a master's or a PhD. And very simply, if you were to tell me research is what I love, it's what drives me, I want to make a significant component of my career, academia, I can't live without writing grants and doing grant-funded research and teaching students, then I would tell you, you need a PhD. If you say, all I care about is treating patients, I want to work in a clinic, I would say, well, you don't need a PhD, you're welcome to do one, but a master's is perfectly sufficient for the board certification that you'll need for clinical practice. There is something now called the DMP, or Professional Doctorate. That's similar to the MD degree or a PharmD. Maybe a better analogy is if you do a PhD in pharmacy, you're probably going to do research for a drug company, but if you get a PharmD, you're going to go be a pharmacist. So the idea of the DMP was to create a professional doctorate for medical physics. And the idea was really driven by the fact that there weren't enough residency spots out there. The DMP is something that is not fully embraced by the profession at this point, and there's a lot of discussion about its future in medical physics. We created a DMP only because it was a if you can't beat them, join them thing, and we didn't want to be in a position where we were losing good applicants to other programs that had a DMP position. As of now, we have only ever accepted and graduated one DMP student. So it's there just in case the field decides, hey, the DMP would be a really good way to go. And things like that happen, right? Right now, nurse practitioners, for example, in the U.S. are all getting doctorates in nurse practitioning. These are some of the research projects that you'll see in our list of graduates if you were to go on the website, and that kind of gives you a flavor for some of these. Some famous people on there, you see a flavor of some of the things that some of our students are doing. And then I had a few publications here by our students, which we don't really have time to go through. From the very clinically oriented, this is spine radiotherapy for patients with spinal metastases, to the very crazy stuff like kilovoltage nanoparticle enhanced radiotherapy for glioblastoma, like this one here. These are just some things that I was going to tell you about how we teach our medical residents, but we really don't need to go through that here. The two subspecialties that hire the most medical physicists are radiation oncology and diagnostic imaging. We do have physicists who go into nuclear medicine, health physics, and a variety of other places, but this is where the vast majority of jobs are. So I think probably right there is a good place to stop and ask for questions, because I want to make sure that there's enough time for you guys to have some questions afterward. So, well, Bernie. Thank you. Sorry, I went a little long because of some of the questions that were asked, and I want to make space for as much of that as I can. If you guys have any specific questions, happy to answer those now. Yeah.
One of the concerns I had when I was thinking about applying is like, what are the jobs in this area? Like even in the States across the border, but like relatively close to Windsor, are there a lot of jobs?
The job market is very good for people who get residency positions and get board certification. The last number I saw was something like 98% of people who complete a residency get a clinical position if they choose to have one. They don't necessarily have to. They can go into industry or a variety of other places. But again, you mentioned two things there: job market and location. While you are going to have if you go through a quality program, get a residency, go through a quality residency program, you're going to get a job, but you don't know where it's going to be. And so this is what I always tell our students too. Look, wherever you get that first job, you're going to go there, you're going to excel, you're going to get board certified, and then you're going to wait. Because you don't want to be looked at as a job hopper and go from place to place, because people don't like that on a CV. But you'll wait until the perfect job opens up in the place that you want it to open up, and maybe that takes a year, maybe it takes a few years, but ultimately you'll find yourself in the place that you want to be, in the institution that you want to be at. There are a small number of jobs, but again, there are a small number of qualified people looking at those jobs.
I can give you an example of your former colleague, Justin Camp, who was my student there, and after that there, he had 3 offers. He chose what he wants.
And he stayed in Michigan.
Yeah.
So yes,
very good.
There are lots of opportunities. The filter in the pipeline is at the residency. So you have 300 or so graduates coming out of medical physics graduate programs being filtered down to about 150 residency spots per year. So that's where the filter is. So don't get caught in the filter by going to a place that doesn't place students into residency if that's what you want to do. If you want to go into clinical medical physics and you're applying to graduate schools in medical physics, look at their website. They're actually required by our accrediting agency to put these statistics on the website. And if the statistics say that they place 5% of their graduates into residencies, don't say, oh, well, I'm going to be the one because I'm really smart. I'm going to go there and I'm going to get a residency. Maybe you will, but I would gravitate towards the ones that put most of their students into residencies. And there are a number of those really good programs out there.
Okay, with that, we're going to have to call it quits, but I'm going to just invite everyone, maybe let's just move outside. I just want to make sure the students have a chance to talk to Jay. We'll turn over the room to, I know Aaron's getting ready for his talk, but let's just move outside and make sure Jay has a chance to meet all the people so he can actually, I want to make sure he knows your names and your faces, because he'll probably be communicating in the future, and then we'll do that. And then here's just a small gift for Jay. For